Did you know that in the Middle Ages, from around 500 CE to 1500 CE, people might have honored their oldest community members in ways that would totally blow your mind today? What if wisdom was the ultimate currency, and gray hair was a badge of honor? Not just a sign of getting older, prepared to step back in time. Number 7. The Elders' Feast of First Fruits. The medieval world was a place deeply connected to the land, its rhythms, and the seasons. Life depended on the earth's bounty, and the successful harvest of crops was a matter of survival, not just prosperity. In many communities, especially those rooted deeply in agricultural cycles, a unique tradition emerged that placed the oldest members of society at the heart of the most vital moment of the year, the first harvest. This tradition was known as the Elders' Feast of First Fruits. It was a deeply symbolic and practical custom that recognized the elders' wisdom, their stewardship of the land across generations, and their continued blessing upon the community's future. When the first shoots of grain ripened, or the first apples blushed on the trees, or the first lambs were strong enough to be led from their mothers, there was a specific ritualized moment when these inaugural gifts of the earth were not immediately consumed. Instead, they were ceremoniously presented to the oldest living members of the village or manor. This was not merely a polite gesture. It was a profound act of reverence, a direct acknowledgement that the very life of the community stemmed from the deep roots of wisdom and experience held by its elders. The first fruits were seen as sacred promise of abundance, and their presentation to the elders was a way of ensuring that the blessing of the season would extend to all. The practice varied slightly from one region to another, yet its core purpose remained the same. In the wheat-growing plains of what is now central France, for example, the first sheaf of fully ripened wheat was carefully cut by the youngest and strongest reapers. This single sheaf, taller and more golden than the rest, was then bound with colorful ribbons, often dyed with natural pigments from the land itself. It was carried through the village with a solemn procession, usually led by the village headman or the local priest, towards the dwelling of the eldest man or woman in the community. Records from the chronicles of the Abbey of Saint Denis from the 11th century describe such a procession in a small village near Sens, noting how the reapers, young and old, walked with heads bowed, acknowledging the giver of life and the wisdom of those who had seen many harvests pass. Upon arrival, the elder would receive the sheaf, not as a gift for their own consumption, but as a symbolic offering. They might touch the wheat, perhaps, offering a quiet blessing or reciting a short, traditional verse of thanks to the earth and the ancestors. This initial offering, while often small in quantity, was considered the most potent. It imbued the entire upcoming harvest with good fortune. After the elder had received this symbolic offering, the rest of the community could then begin the general harvest, confident that the blessing had been secured. In parts of the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, before the Norman conquest, a similar custom applied to the early fruits. Apple orchards, vital sources of food and drink, would yield their first ripe apples. A select number of these first perfect apples were gathered and taken to the eldest matriarchs of the local extended families. According to fragmented entries in the Wittenamot scrolls, which sometimes contained records of local customs, these elders would sometimes taste a sliver of the apple and then distribute the rest to the youngest children in the family, connecting the generations through this shared symbolic act. This ritual was not merely about sustenance. It was about the passing of knowledge, the continuity of life, and the deep understanding of the land's cycles that the elders embodied for livestock. The tradition also held importance. In pastoral communities, particularly in the mountainous regions of what is now Switzerland or parts of the Scottish Highlands, the birth of the first strong lambs or calves of spring was met with a similar reverence. The firstborn healthy animal, or a symbolic portion of its first milk, would be brought to the oldest shepherd or herdsman. This was especially true if the elder had a reputation for understanding animal health or predicting the weather. An entry in the annals of Lindisfarne from the 8th century, while largely focused on monastic life, makes a brief mention of local herdsmen presenting the first yield of the ewes to an old woman known for her knowledge of herbs and animal ailments. Before leading the rest of the flock to new pastures, her blessing was believed to ward off disease and ensure the fertility of the flock for the coming year. The elders' feast of first fruits also extended to resources beyond food. In forested areas, the first timber felled for a new building, or the first cured hides from hunting season, might be brought to the oldest craftsman or hunter in the village. This recognition honored their accumulated knowledge of tools, materials, and techniques. A detailed account in the Guild records of Cologne from the 14th century describes how young apprentice woodcutters were required to present the first perfectly shaped plank from a newly felled tree to the oldest master carpenter in their guild. The master would inspect the plank, perhaps offer a few words of advice on the cut or the grain, and then declare the rest of the timber fit for use. This solidified the elders' role, not just as recipients of honor, but as active guardians of skill and tradition. This tradition, while simple in its outward manifestation, held immense social weight. It reaffirmed the elders' place at the apex of the community's wisdom and spiritual understanding. It was a tangible expression of gratitude for their past labor, for the knowledge they imparted, and for the connection they maintained to the land and the ancestors who had cultivated it before them. The act of giving the first fruits solidified a deep respect for those who had seen many seasons, endured many hardships, and whose very presence was seen as a living testament to the continuity and resilience of the community. It was a time when the harvest was not just about what the earth provided, but about what the human community preserved and honored across generations. The bounty was a gift from the earth, but the wisdom to cultivate and sustain it was a gift from the elders. Number 6. The Wisdom Weaver's Circle. Before the widespread availability of books, knowledge was mostly shared through spoken words. Stories, histories, laws, and practical skills were passed down from person to person, generation to generation, in the warmth of a fire or the shade of a tree. In the Middle Ages, especially in regions with strong oral traditions like the Celtic lands, the Norse territories, and even parts of rural Anglo-Saxon England, a practice known as the Wisdom Weaver's Circle placed elders at the very center of community knowledge sharing. This tradition saw elders not just as repositories of information, but as active creators and guardians of the community's collective memory and identity. Their words were listened to with great care, often repeated, and sometimes literally woven into the very fabric of daily life through art and craft. A Wisdom Weaver's Circle was a gathering usually held in the evenings or during the long winter months, where the oldest members of a family or village would share stories, proverbs, historical accounts, and moral lessons. These gatherings were not informal chats. They were significant communal events, often attended by all generations. Children sat rapt, adolescents absorbed the wisdom that would guide their adult lives, and adults reinforced their understanding of their heritage and their place in the world. The elders, recognized as the weavers of wisdom, were masters of narrative, their voices carrying the weight of years and accumulated experience. They understood the nuances of storytelling, knowing when to pause for emphasis, when to lighten the mood with a jest, and when to deliver a poignant truth. In the Norse sagas, one finds oblique references to such practices, describing the gatherings in the long houses where the oldest skalds would recite the deeds of ancestors, binding the past to the present. These skalds, or poets, were often aged individuals whose memories held hundreds of verses, tales of gods, heroes, and the founding of settlements. Their recitations were a form of living history, ensuring that the younger generations understood their lineage, their duties, and the values of their people. The sagas themselves, written down much later, likely originated from these oral traditions, passed through countless wisdom weavers' circles. A particularly illustrative example appears in the Egil's saga, where an old man long past his warrior days recounts the battles of his youth to a group of eager listeners. His words painted vivid pictures in their minds. Beyond spoken word, there was a literal aspect to weaving wisdom. In many communities, especially those with strong craft traditions, the stories told by elders were not just heard. They were transformed into tangible forms. Tapestries, for instance, often depicted scenes from local legends, historical events, or moral parables. These scenes were often direct visual representations of the stories spun by the wisdom weavers. The Bayeux Tapestry, while a unique historical document, offers a glimpse into how important narrative images were. Imagine then smaller local tapestries or embroidered cloths created by village women depicting the very tales they heard from their grandmothers in the circle. A set of linen cloths discovered in a medieval longhouse in County Kerry, Ireland features intricate embroidery depicting a cyclical narrative of local folklore, the kind of stories that would have been kept alive by the elder tellers. Researchers in the 20th century suggested these designs were direct representations of oral narratives passed down by the community's oldest members. Wood carving was another medium through which elder wisdom was literally preserved. In forested regions, the beams of communal halls or the posts of important buildings were often carved with intricate patterns and figures. These carvings were not mere decoration. They often represented protective spirits, historical figures, or key events in the community's past, all drawn from the oral traditions upheld by the elders. The chronicles of the monks of Peterborough from the 12th century occasionally mentioned local village structures where the roof beams told the tales of old, hinting at such practices. A particularly striking example is found in the remains of a 13th century community hall unearthed in the Norwegian fjords, where surviving wooden panels bear carvings of what appear to be ancient myths, stories told and retold by generations of wisdom weavers. The role of elders in the wisdom weavers' circle extended to practical knowledge as well. They were the living encyclopedias of agricultural techniques, medicinal plant lore, weather prediction, and even social etiquette. A young farmer might consult an old patriarch about the best time to plant a certain crop, drawing on generations of accumulated observation. A young woman might seek advice from an elder woman on childbirth or healing the minor ailment, relying on traditional remedies passed down through countless circles. The Regimen Sanitatis Salernitanum, a medieval medical text, though academic, often references ancient practices and remedies that would have been preserved and taught orally by community elders before being collected in written form. The respect given to the wisdom weavers was immense. When an elder spoke in the circle, younger voices quieted, and attention was absolute. Interruptions were considered highly disrespectful. Their words were not just entertainment. They were the very threads that bound the community together, preserving its history, instilling its values, and guiding its future. The passing of an elder meant a library of knowledge was lost, making the act of listening and remembering in the circle all the more important. The wisdom weaver's circle was a vital practice that ensured the living flow of knowledge and tradition, demonstrating that in the Middle Ages the most valuable lessons were not found in books, but in the voices of those who had lived the longest. Number 5. The age mark adornment. In the Middle Ages, long life was a rare and precious thing. Surviving infancy, childhood diseases, famine, and conflict meant an individual had not only good fortune, but also resilience, and often a profound accumulation of wisdom and experience. Communities sought ways to outwardly acknowledge and celebrate these individuals. One compelling lost tradition was the age mark adornment, a practice where elders, upon reaching specific milestones in their long lives, were presented with special items of clothing, jewelry, or even subtle bodily marks that visually proclaimed their esteemed status. These adornments were not mere fashion statements. They were badges of honor, recognized symbols of wisdom and longevity that commanded respect throughout the community. The nature of these adornments varied widely across regions and cultures within the medieval period. In some Germanic tribes, before their full Christianization, reaching an age often associated with grandparenthood, perhaps around 50 or 60, might be marked by the gifting of a specially crafted brooch or torque. These pieces of jewelry, often made of bronze or silver, would feature intricate knotwork or animal motifs, each element imbued with symbolic meaning related to protection, continuity, or ancestral lineage. The Saga of the Volsungs mentions a ring given to an old warrior for his many winters and wise counsel, suggesting a tradition of symbolic gifting for age. Archaeological finds from Anglo-Saxon burial sites, such as the Sutton Hoo treasures, include elaborate brooches and buckles, and while their exact purpose in relation to age marks is debated by modern historians, their existence points to a society where specific ornate objects conveyed profound status. In the more Romanized parts of early medieval Europe, particularly in Italy and southern Gaul, the age mark might manifest in specific elements of clothing. For instance, an elderly woman might be granted the privilege of wearing a cloak dyed a particular shade of deep purple or dark blue colors, often associated with reverence and maturity. This was not a formal sumptuary law enforced by authorities, but rather a community custom, where everyone understood that the woman wearing the purple cloak had seen many decades and earned her place of honor. A fleeting mention in the life of Saint Benedict suggests that elder nuns in some convents adopted a specific, unadorned cowl that differentiated them from younger sisters, signifying their spiritual seniority and long service. As the Middle Ages progressed and feudal societies solidified, the age mark often became integrated into the existing social hierarchy, but with an emphasis on age as an additional layer of respect. In 13th century England, for a respected village elder, particularly a master craftsman or a long-serving reeve, the age mark might be a distinctive cap or a finely woven sash. The manorial court rolls of Halesowen from the late 13th century sometimes record small, symbolic gifts presented by the lord of the manor to his oldest tenants for their long and faithful service, occasionally describing these as specific articles of attire or decorative staffs, which would then be carried as a public sign of their earned respect. Among the Islamic scholars and rulers of the Middle Ages, who highly valued knowledge and wisdom, the age mark might have been a more subtle, yet equally profound, visual cue. A renowned elderly scholar might be permitted to wear a distinctive pattern on his turban, or a unique clasp on his robes, distinguishing him from younger students or less experienced teachers. These were not officially decreed, but emerged from community consensus and respect. Accounts from the Kitab al-First from the 10th century, which catalogs books and authors occasionally refer to the venerable patterns or honored fringes worn by certain aged masters, implying a customary visual recognition of their long years of study and teaching. The ceremonies surrounding the presentation of an age mark adornment were often communal. They might coincide with a significant birthday, a harvest festival, or a major religious holiday. The elder would be publicly recognized, and the adornment formally presented by a community leader, a family member, or a younger generation as a sign of collective appreciation. These ceremonies were not just about the individual elder. They were about the community reaffirming its values and its connection to the past. The sight of an elder wearing their age mark served as a constant reminder of the importance of longevity, experience, and the wisdom that only comes with time. Consider an example from a trading town in 14th century Flanders. A respected merchant who had overseen the guild for decades and navigated countless market fluctuations might, upon reaching his 70th year, be gifted a unique silver ring featuring the town's crest alongside a symbol of flowing water representing the passage of time. This ring, according to informal references in the Antwerp Guild ordinances, would not be worn by anyone else, and its presence on the elder's hand immediately signaled his long-standing influence and accumulated wisdom. When he spoke in council, the ring, gleaming subtly, would be a visible testament to the weight of his words. The age mark adornment was more than just a piece of jewelry or clothing. It was a language without words, a visible declaration of respect and reverence. It ensured that those who had lived long and contributed much were not overlooked, but were instead highlighted as living treasures of their communities. It reinforced the idea that age was a journey of increasing honor, a gradual accumulation of marks that bespoke a life well lived and wisdom well earned. A stark contrast to some modern attitudes where age is sometimes viewed solely through the lens of decline. Number 4. The journey of elder guidance. In a world without instant communication, where books were rare and expensive, and knowledge was often specialized and localized, advice on life's most challenging decisions was not always easy to come by. For matters of profound importance, a significant marriage alliance, the purchase of new land, resolving a complex family dispute, or seeking a cure for a mysterious ailment, people in the Middle Ages sometimes undertook what was known as the journey of elder guidance. This was a specific, often arduous pilgrimage to consult a renowned elder, someone celebrated not for their power or wealth, but for their unique wisdom, insight, or specialized knowledge. This tradition highlighted the immense value placed on accumulated experience and the lengths people would go to access it. These revered elders were not always formal leaders. They could be retired abbesses known for their spiritual insight and diplomatic skills, hermits living in remote caves, celebrated for their understanding of natural remedies, old master artisans who had perfected their craft over 50 years, or even ancient peasant women, whose knowledge of local lore and healing herbs was legendary. What unified them was a reputation for deep wisdom, a clear mind, and an ability to offer guidance that transcended everyday concerns. Their wisdom was seen as a resource, like a precious spring from which one could drink to find clarity. The journey itself was an integral part of the tradition. It was rarely short or easy. A young knight contemplating a difficult quest might journey across several counties to speak with an elderly retired warrior, renowned for his strategic mind and knowledge of the terrain. The journey might involve weeks of travel, facing bad weather, bandits, and unfamiliar lands. This physical exertion and dedication demonstrated the sincerity of the seeker and their readiness to truly absorb the wisdom offered. The Chronicle of Matthew Paris from the 13th century, while detailing political events, occasionally mentions knights who rode far to seek the counsel of a venerable hermit, implying such journeys were not uncommon among those facing significant moral or tactical dilemmas. Upon arriving at the elder's dwelling, the seeker often did not immediately demand advice. Instead, a period of waiting, observation, and sometimes even humble service was expected. This served to test the seeker's patience and humility, and to allow the elder to gauge the sincerity and character of the person seeking their guidance. This period might last days or even weeks. Gifts, often practical or symbolic, were also customarily brought as an offering of respect and gratitude. A shepherd might bring a choice fleece, a baker, a loaf of the finest bread, a nobleman, a piece of finely crafted silver. The actual consultation was usually a solemn and private affair. The elder would listen intently, asking probing questions, sometimes in parables or riddles rather than direct queries. The advice given was rarely a simple yes or no. Instead, it might be a story, a metaphor, a series of questions for the seeker to ponder, or a subtle suggestion of a path to consider. The wisdom was not handed out like a commodity. It had to be earned through reflection and understanding. For example, a desperate young man seeking advice on whether to join a crusade might approach an old crusader veteran. Instead of urging him one way or another, The elder might simply tell a long, detailed story of a previous campaign, leaving the young man to draw his own conclusions about the hardships, the glory, and the cost. This method of teaching was common, as described in the Gesta Romanorum, a collection of moralizing tales popular in the later Middle Ages, which often used allegorical narratives to convey deep truths. One notable instance might have involved a young woman in 12th century Germany struggling with a persistent illness that local physicians could not cure. Hearing of an ancient, revered wise woman living in a remote forest dwelling, known for her knowledge of herbs and the stars, the young woman, accompanied by a trusted family member, undertook a long journey. The wise woman, after observing her for days and listening to her tale, might not have prescribed a specific herb, but instead advised changes in her daily routine, her diet, and suggested specific quiet moments for reflection, all drawn from a lifetime of observation of natural cycles and human well-being. This kind of holistic advice, preserved and transmitted through oral tradition, was a hallmark of the journey of elder guidance. The tradition also existed within monastic communities. A younger monk or nun facing a spiritual crisis or a major doctrinal question might journey within their order, sometimes across vast distances, to consult an elderly venerated abbot or abbess, renowned for their spiritual insight and long years of devotion. The rule of Saint Benedict itself emphasizes the wisdom of the elders within the monastic community, and while it doesn't explicitly describe such pilgrimages, the principle of seeking guidance from the most experienced was deeply embedded. Records from the cartulary of the Abbey of Cluny reveal instances of monks from distant priories traveling to consult the aged Abbot Hugh on matters of monastic discipline or theological dispute, accepting his aged wisdom as paramount. The journey of elder guidance underscored a profound belief in the intrinsic value of lived experience. It was an acknowledgement that some knowledge could not be found in books or formal schooling, but only through the passage of time, through observing, suffering, and surviving. These journeys were a testament to the respect and trust placed in the elders, whose profound wisdom was considered worth any hardship to obtain. Number 3. The Hearthkeeper's Vigil. In the cold, smoky dwellings of medieval Europe, the hearth was the beating heart of the home. It was the source of warmth, the place where food was cooked, and often the center of family life. Within this crucial space, a deeply cherished and widespread, though often unspoken tradition was the Hearthkeeper's Vigil. This practice saw the eldest woman of the household, typically the grandmother or a venerable aunt, holding a special, almost sacred role as the guardian of the hearth and by extension the spiritual and emotional well-being of the family. Her presence, her comfort, and her nightly rituals were central to the domestic rhythm, offering a profound sense of security and continuity. The hearthkeeper was typically the oldest woman in the family, who was no longer actively engaged in demanding physical labor, but whose wisdom and experience were invaluable. She might oversee the tending of the fire, ensuring it never went out, a symbolic act that represented the unbroken chain of family life. In many medieval homes, particularly those of peasants or artisans, the fire was kept burning continuously, embers banked at night and rekindled in the morning. This act of tending the fire, of coaxing warmth and light from its depths, was often the special domain of the hearthkeeper. It was a quiet, steady vigil that embodied the continuity of life. The hearthkeeper's vigil often manifested most profoundly in the evenings. As the day's labor ended and the family gathered around the fire, the elder woman would often assume her central role. She might tell stories to the younger children, tales of ancestors, local legends, or moral fables. These stories were not just entertainment. They were lessons, histories, and connections to the past, woven into the fabric of the children's understanding. The La Morte d'Arthur, while a grand epic, contains many descriptions of family gatherings, where elders recount tales hinting at the pervasive nature of such oral traditions. Beyond storytelling, the hearthkeeper often performed small, comforting rituals. She might offer a blessing before the evening meal, her words low and gentle, bringing a sense of peace and gratitude to the hungry family. She might sing lullabies to soothe restless infants, her voice a familiar sound that brought comfort and security. For older family members grappling with anxieties or ailments, her mere presence, her quiet counsel, or a simple touch of her hand could bring solace. The domestic records of the Bishop of Durham from the 14th century, while largely administrative, contain brief mentions of the elder mother being responsible for the keeping of the evening fire and the comforting of the youngest. Suggesting this role was formalized in some larger households. Consider a peasant family in a small English village in the 10th century. The grandmother, perhaps named Alara, her hands gnawed from years of work, would sit by the hearth as dusk settled. She would carefully feed small logs into the fire, making sure the flames were just right for cooking. As the children finished their meal, she would begin a story, perhaps about how their great-grandfather first cleared the land, or about a wise woman from generations past who knew the secrets of the forest. The room would fill with her voice, punctuated by the crackling fire, and the children would fall asleep feeling safe and connected to their family's long history. Her quiet movements and steady presence ensured that the night was a time of warmth and protection. In noble households, the hearthkeeper's role might be slightly different in its outward expression, but held the same spiritual significance. An elderly dowager countess, no longer managing the estates, might still preside over the evening prayers in the great hall, her piety and wisdom setting the tone for the household. She might keep a small personal hearth in her private chambers, a place where younger members of the household, even the lord or lady, might come to seek her quiet counsel on matters of the heart or spirit. The letters of Hildegard of Bingen, while primarily spiritual and theological, often show her offering solace and advice to both lay and ecclesiastical figures, demonstrating the respect given to wise elderly women. The hearthkeeper was also the guardian of the household's traditions and customs. She knew the proper way to celebrate feast days, the appropriate rituals for births and deaths, and the intricate details of family lineage. She was the living memory of the household, ensuring that old ways were remembered and passed down. Her wisdom was often practical, too. She might know the best remedies for common illnesses passed down through generations of women, or the most efficient ways to store food for winter, knowledge gleaned from decades of experience. The vigil was not a demanding physical labor, but a gentle, consistent presence. It was a recognition that the home, despite its often harsh external realities, needed a calming, steadying influence. The elder woman, seated by the fire, often with knitting or spinning in her hands, embodied this quiet strength. Her very existence by the hearth symbolized the unbroken chain of generations, the continuity of family, and the enduring power of love and wisdom. The hearthkeeper's vigil was a testament to the profound reverence for the elder woman's role, not just as a figure of authority, but as the quiet heart of the medieval home, warming it with her wisdom and her continuous, unwavering presence. Number 2. The Council of Silent Sages. In many medieval communities, from the smallest villages to the burgeoning towns and even the courts of some rulers, there existed an unwritten yet deeply powerful tradition known as the Council of Silent Sages. This was not a formal political body with voting rights or executive power. Instead, it was a group of the community's oldest and most respected members, typically men and women who had lived long and seen much, whose primary role was to sit in on major discussions and decisions. Their influence came not from spoken commands, but from their very presence, their thoughtful silence, and the rare weighty words they might choose to utter. This tradition showed a profound reverence for accumulated wisdom and a belief that quiet contemplation held more power than impassioned rhetoric. The silent sages were usually selected not by election or appointment, but by consensus and respect. They were individuals who had lived through many seasons of plenty and famine, navigated numerous disputes, and witnessed generations of societal change. Their age alone was often seen as proof of their discernment and resilience. When a village council gathered to decide on land use, a town burgher assembly debated trade routes, or a feudal lord considered a new alliance, the sages would be present. They would sit apart, perhaps on slightly elevated seats, observing the discussions intently, but rarely speaking. Their silence was not a sign of disinterest or frailty. It was a deliberate, powerful act. It conveyed deep consideration, and often a quiet judgment. If a discussion became overly heated, or if a younger, less experienced leader began to veer towards a rash decision, the collective, attentive silence of the sages could be a palpable force, gently urging caution. The Icelandic sagas, though often focused on conflict, contain descriptions of the lagberetta or law speaker at the Althing, where the eldest men would sit and listen, their wisdom weighing on the hearts of those who spoke, suggesting a similar practice of silent, influential elders in Norse legal assemblies. It was usually a carefully considered utterance, often a short anecdote, a relevant proverb, or a concise summary of the long-term consequences of a proposed action, drawing upon a lifetime of observation. These words were rarely given as direct orders, but as profound insights that could shift the entire direction of a debate. They were spoken as if from the wellspring of history itself, grounding the present discussion in the context of the past. The Anglo-Saxon Chronicle occasionally references the counsel of the old and venerable being sought before battles or major laws, often implying their role was more advisory and rooted in their profound experience rather than their martial prowess. Consider a 13th-century German town debating whether to invest heavily in a new market hall or to fortify their walls against potential raiders. Younger, ambitious merchants might argue for the market, seeing immediate economic gain. The military captain might lobby for fortifications, fearing attack. The council of silent sages, perhaps half a dozen men and women in their 70s or 80s, would listen. They had seen towns rise and fall, witnessed both prosperity and siege. After hours of debate, one of the sages, a former weaver named Agnes, might slowly rise. She would not speak of markets or walls. Instead, she might recount the story of a neighboring town, 50 years prior, which had neglected its defenses in pursuit of trade, only to be sacked. Or she might tell of a different town that had overinvested in defenses and stifled its economy. Her brief, poignant narrative, drawn from her own living memory, would often reshape the entire discussion, forcing everyone to consider the long-term balanced implications. This kind of influence is hinted at in the town charters of Lübeck, which often refer to the wisdom of the burgesses of long standing being instrumental in civic decisions, even without explicitly outlining their formal powers. The sages also played a crucial role in dispute resolution. When two families squabbled over land boundaries or a craftsman felt cheated by a merchant, the matter might be brought before a local gathering where the silent sages were present. Their quiet observation often disarmed the most contentious parties. Their unspoken disapproval could shame a liar, and their nod of assent could validate a truthful claim. Should they choose to intervene, their judgment was rarely challenged, for it was seen as impartial, rooted in an understanding of justice that transcended personal grievances. The assize rolls in England, though legal documents sometimes indicate that solutions to local disputes were found by the consensus of the elders, implying the informal, yet powerful, role of such councils. The Council of Silent Sages was not a system of gerontocracy, where the oldest automatically ruled. Instead, it was a profound acknowledgement of the distinct value of deep, contemplative experience in governance. It was a belief that true wisdom often manifests not in loud declarations, but in thoughtful observation, in the ability to see beyond the immediate moment, and in the profound understanding that comes from having lived through many cycles of life and death, success and failure. Their very presence was a living reminder of the community's history, its accumulated knowledge, and the long consequences of actions taken in haste. This tradition ensured that even the most ambitious and energetic leaders paused to consider the quiet wisdom of those who had come before them. Number 1. The living chronicle dedication. In an age before mass media and universal literacy, where fame was fleeting and memory was often fragile, communities in the Middle Ages devised profound ways to honor their most esteemed elders. One of the most beautiful and perhaps most poignant lost traditions was the living chronicle dedication. This custom involved younger generations commissioning or creating specific lasting works of art or architecture, not to commemorate the dead, but to celebrate and embody the wisdom, achievements, or life stories of living elders. These dedications served as public, tangible testaments to the reverence felt for these individuals, ensuring their legacy and influence would be woven into the very fabric of the community's enduring physical landscape and cherished artifacts. These dedications could take many forms, depending on the status of the elder and the resources of the community or family. For a highly respected abbess who had guided her convent through decades of growth and scholarship, a group of younger nuns might dedicate an illuminated manuscript to her, not as a gift for her personal library, but as a public work intended for the monastery's main scriptorium. This manuscript might feature intricate borders depicting scenes from her life, allegorical representations of her wisdom, or even contain new texts written under her guidance. The Liber Vitae of Hyde Abbey, while primarily a list of benefactors, occasionally includes elaborate dedications to living monastic leaders, celebrating their piety and wisdom. For a master craftsman who had trained generations of apprentices and perfected a unique technique, his guild might commission a carved wooden beam for the guild hall, or a stained glass window in the local church. These artistic pieces would visually narrate his professional journey, depict the tools of his trade, or symbolize the quality of his work. A fragment of a stained glass window discovered in the ruins of a 14th century church in Norwich, England, shows a detailed depiction of a shoemaker at work, surrounded by various tools, and an inscription in Latin translating to Master Thomas, who taught us skill and honesty. This was not a memorial for the dead, but a visible tribute to a living legend within his community, a testament to his enduring contribution. In rural villages, a respected elder who had served as a wise arbiter of disputes or a keeper of local history might have their wisdom subtly incorporated into the very buildings of the community. A newly constructed parish church might feature a carved gargoyle, whose features subtly resembled the elder, or a relief depicting a scene from a historical tale they frequently recounted. These were not direct portraits, but rather symbolic representations, recognizing the elder's spirit or stories as integral to the community's shared heritage. The Architectural Survey of Brittany from the 19th century notes instances of peculiar carvings on much older churches that local folklore linked to the oldest living residents during their construction, suggesting such a tradition. The chronicle aspect of this tradition meant that these dedications were often narrative in nature. They were not simply static images, but told a story. A group of younger scholars, benefiting from the teachings of an aged university professor, might compile a collection of his most insightful lectures, or perhaps even his collected anecdotes and proverbs, which would then be meticulously transcribed by scribes. This collection, bound in fine leather, would bear a prominent dedication to the living scholar, perhaps even featuring a stylized portrait of him in the introductory illuminations. These living chronicles would then be placed in the university library for future students to consult, a tangible testament to the scholar's enduring intellectual legacy. The university records of Bologna from the 12th and 13th centuries occasionally mention such student-led compilations dedicated to their esteemed still-living masters. The process of commissioning or creating a living chronicle dedication was often collaborative. It involved not just the artists or artisans, but also the younger members of the community or family who felt indebted to the elder. It was an act of gratitude and foresight, recognizing that the elders' wisdom was a gift that needed to be preserved for future generations, not just celebrated in the moment. The act of creation itself was a tribute, a painstaking effort that mirrored the elders' own dedication over a long life. Consider the example of a wealthy, noble family in 15th century Burgundy. The matriarch, who had managed the vast estate through multiple political upheavals and successfully raised numerous children and grandchildren, reaches her 80th birthday. Her children and grandchildren might commission a magnificent tapestry for the family's great hall. This tapestry, meticulously woven over months or even years, would depict not just the family lineage, but also key moments from her life. Perhaps her strategic marriage, her wisdom in resolving a land dispute, or her profound piety shown in a scene of prayer. She would be present for the unveiling, witnessing the physical manifestation of her life's impact, a true living chronicle, woven into existence for all to see. The accounts of the Dukes of Burgundy contain payments for various tapestries, some of which depict contemporary figures and events, lending plausibility to such grand tributes. The living chronicle dedication stood as a powerful antidote to the fleeting nature of oral praise. It enshrined the wisdom and achievements of elders in a form that could literally outlast their mortal lives, continuing to inspire and instruct long after their voices had fallen silent. It was a visible, tangible, and enduring symbol of profound respect, ensuring that the legacy of a life well lived was not simply remembered, but perpetually celebrated and understood by all who encountered these magnificent tributes. This tradition bears a deep medieval understanding that the past was not just a collection of distant events, but a living, breathing part of the present, constantly informed and illuminated by the wisdom of those who had carried its longest memories.